Chapter 23 in the SMART sales system is around qualifying the prospect. And basically, what we're referring to with qualifying the prospect is assessing how good or bad the prospect is. And when you're looking at that topic, you may think, well, that's not the most important thing that I need to worry about, or I can just do that on my own natural instinct. I don't really need to develop any skills in this area. And I actually think this is an extremely important area, and it's an important enough area to take a step back and develop your skills and your knowledge around qualifying the prospect. And the reason why is because time is one of your most valuable resources, and there's nothing you can do to buy more hours in the day or buy more hours in the week. And as a salesperson, there are only so many hours that are customer facing. So many hours that you can make calls or meet with clients. With it being a fixed amount of time, what determines your success is how well you are able to optimize the time you have to work with. One thing that is important to kind of always be mindful of is a concept of opportunity cost. So opportunity cost is when you're choosing between A and B, whether that's entertainment or an investment opportunity or an employment opportunity, when you're trying to choose between path A and path B, the opportunity cost to you with your decision is the path that you choose not to go down. If you're trying to choose between going to two different restaurants or two different movies, the cost that you incur is what you miss out on the path that you don't go down. And this is very clear, cut, and dry regarding sales. Because while you can send out 1,000 emails at one time, you can only make one phone call at a time. You can only meet with one prospect at a time. So when you decide which prospect you're going to spend your time with, the opportunity cost is what you're giving up instead. So maybe you're giving up meeting with another prospect. The opportunity cost in the decision that you make when you choose one prospect over another is how much you would have sold to the other prospect. So if you choose wisely, your opportunity cost is low because you end up choosing the best prospect to deal with. Then you pass up spending time with a prospect that wasn't going to buy from you or a prospect that was going to spend less. And when you're able to make these decisions, you're able to decrease your opportunity cost, and you're able to optimize the amount of time that you have to work with. That concept is fairly straightforward, right? In order to achieve that, you need to decrease the amount of time you spend with bad prospects and increase the amount of time that you spend with good prospects. Pretty simple, right? Well, it actually can be difficult to do and difficult to consistently do. And one reason why is if you take a pie of prospects, all of the different prospects that you can call, that you can meet with, that you can end up talking to, it's really a small slice of the pie of the total prospects. A small slice are prospects that could potentially fit with what you sell. Meaning the majority of the prospects on your list or in your territory or that you come into contact with do not fit with what you sell. And if we dig into the slice of the pie that may fit a little close and look at it a little closer, we can break off a piece of those that may fit and say that there's a small slice of those that may fit where there is a fit. So if you really were to look closely at them, many of those that may fit, you would find out it's not a perfect fit or they don't really need what you sell. And we could even drill in a little further to the slice where there is a fit to say there's this very small slice where there's a fit right now. How those differ from where there is a fit is that even those that have a fit and need what you sell, maybe they don't have budget right now. And it's really a small slice where they need what you sell, it's a fit, and they're able to move forward and they have money and able to take action. So when you look at it, the majority of prospects that you encounter don't fit at all or aren't a good enough fit to really move forward. It's just a very small slice that are really prime to purchase from you. And it's qualifying that helps us to determine where the prospect fits, which slice of the pie they're in, and it's determining that can allow you who to spend your time with and how much time to spend with each prospect. Now, when you look at that, it can be very easy for salespeople to fall into a couple different bad categories. What a lot of salespeople do is they try to sell to the whole pie. They try to sell and meet with and try to talk prospects into buying from them that are in all different slices. The type of salesperson that does this the most are the product selling or product pushing salespeople. Not only do they just try to push their product on everybody, but they might often be spending most of their time talking about their product, not really learning about the prospect's needs, so they don't even know which slice of pie the prospect's in. They're just selling, selling, selling. And when you look at a salesperson that tries to sell to everybody, a lot of time is wasted and a lot of opportunity cost and bad decisions made regarding who to spend the valuable time with. Now, there's actually another extreme where some salespeople, and they don't try to sell to everybody, but they only try to sell to that very small slice of where there's a fit right now, which, yes, those are the most completely qualified prospects in terms of they're ready to move forward today, but those aren't the only prospects that you should be selling to. So it's somewhere in between. An example of a salesperson that only focuses on this slice of the pie is a prospect. I'll take a fictional product, one I used before, and I'll actually use it here today. A salesperson that sells web design, website services. If they only focus on selling web design services to companies that are looking to, basically they're prospecting and they talk to businesses and say, do you need a new website? And if the answer is no, then they move on to the next company. And I get emails every day actually with messages saying, are you looking to redo your website? Well, what they're doing is they're just asking, am I in there's a fit right now? And when I say no, or when I ignore their message based on their question because I don't fit into there's a fit right now, they're passing up on even just starting a conversation with me because I might actually be where there's a fit, but it's just not right now, or there may be a fit. They're not identifying that I'm in the don't fit before moving on, so they're moving on prematurely and doing the opposite of trying to sell to everybody, making the mistake of not selling to those where there's a reason to start a conversation, even if there's not a reason to spend a ton of your valuable time with them. Now, optimally, what you want to do is you want to only spend your time with this quadrant of the pie or these slices of the pie, and it's asking good qualifying questions that allow you to determine, okay, the prospect I'm talking to is in this slice, let's keep talking. Okay, the prospect is not in this slice, let me move on. In order to determine where they are, it's really simply asking good questions. And basically, the qualifying process is asking questions. And we break down the qualifying process into two different steps. So step one is what we call pre-qualifying, and step two is qualifying. So pretty simple. Let's first talk about what step one looks like. So pre-qualifying is we don't really care where they are in that quadrant. We just want to know that they're not in the do not fit at all. So we're just looking for that there may be a fit. And this basically, we accomplish this by asking some soft questions to learn what's generally going on with the prospect, okay? And I'll show you some examples of questions that can help with this. And the goal of pre-qualifying is only to determine, does it make sense for us to keep talking? So if you're talking to someone on a cold call, you want to pre-qualify them just to determine, does it even make sense for us to continue this conversation or to move on to scheduling an appointment? Now, some examples of pre-qualifying questions could be, I'll give you some examples, but I'm going to use a hypothetical scenario here, and I'll just try to use one that everybody can relate to, and this is a car salesperson. So for a car salesperson to fully qualify a prospect, they want to know if they what their credit rating is, what they have, how much money they have to put down. There's a lot of really deep questions. But just to pre-qualify, you might want to ask questions like, oh, what are you currently driving today? And just to show you how good of a pre-qualifying question that is for someone that say, if someone walks onto the lot and you say, well, what are you driving today? And they say, well, I'm driving a 1-year-old model. Well, that tells you they purchased a car very recently, which means that they have a very good car, and most likely they're not going to be purchasing a car based on normal statistics. Someone doesn't go and buy a new car every year. Now, you could drill in to validate that. If they answer with what they currently drive, that the car is 10 years old, then you know, oh, well, it might make sense for us to keep talking. What year is your vehicle? How happy are you with your current car? How do you feel about the fuel economy of your car? How do you feel about the reliability? How often do you purchase a new car? So these are just really soft questions to feel out what's going on with a prospect. Now, this is a very specific example. I'll show you some more generic pre-qualifying questions in a minute. But as you can see, these are just general conversational questions to figure out what's going on. Does it even make sense for me to keep talking to this prospect or not? And they could answer some of those questions with answers that allow you to determine, I should not waste and invest too much time on this prospect. So what I just showed you there were examples for selling cars, but in previous chapters of the Smart Sales System, we've shown you current environment questions and a current environment questions building block, and those are really great for pre-qualifying. What are you using today? How long have you been with them? How's everything going? What are some things you like? What are some things you don't like? And so on. So these are just identifying what's going on with the current environment. Those can definitely help you to pre-qualify. Another building block of questions that are good for pre-qualifying are your pain questions. And if you don't recall what those are or don't know what your pain questions are questions, soft questions that you can ask to probe to see if someone has the pain that you can help to fix. For example, if your product helps with the pain point of can't sleep at night, tossing and turning at night, if those are the pain points that you help with, then a good pain question is, how do you feel about the quality of sleep you get every night? How often do you have nights where you toss and turn? So those are all good questions to probe for the pain point that you help to fix. Now, you may say, well, that sounds great, but I don't really know what pain questions to ask for what I sell. Well, here's a process real quick for you to develop your pain questions. Start with your product, and I'll go back here to web design. Web design services, building websites. Take your product and brainstorm the benefits that that product offers, improves design, traffic conversion, improves search engine, generates more leads. So once you brainstorm the benefits and value points for your product, take your benefits and then reverse engineer those, because each benefit can be turned upside down to identify a pain point that it helps to fix. And for going back to the sleep example, for example, if you sell something that helps someone to sleep better at night, then you can reverse engineer that just that it solves the problem of tossing and turning and having trouble sleeping at night. So there's an inverse relationship between each pain point, each benefit point, and each pain point. So we can take all those benefits for web design services and come up with a corresponding list of pain points. Websites not performing, websites not converting, not getting traffic. Once you have your pain points that your product offers, for each pain point, you should be able to develop a pain question. So if your website's not performing, how do you feel about the current design and layout of your website? How important is it for you to convert more? How important is it, how much of a priority is it for you to get more website traffic? So that process can help you to build your pain questions. And when you combine your pain questions with your current environment questions, you then have what you need to pre-qualify your prospects. Now let me show you where you want to pre-qualify your prospects in terms of the sales process. We've discussed in previous chapters of the Smart Sales System that there's 3 steps that you should be going through with a prospect. You have the initial contact, which is maybe a phone call, could be talking to someone at an event, a networking event, could be talking with someone there, an inbound call, an inbound chat message, an email exchange. So you're interacting with the prospect for the first time. That's the initial contact. Then you want to drive that initial contact to a meeting, such as an appointment or a online meeting or a longer phone call, and then you drive that step to some sort of presentation. So the primary place where you're going to do pre-qualifying is the initial contact. And remember, pre-qualifying is just to determine, does it make sense for us to keep talking? So you're pre-qualifying at the initial contact to determine, does it make sense for me to schedule an appointment with this person? You don't need to worry too much about if they're the decision maker, if they have budget, because all you're putting at risk is a brief meeting. Once you get to the meeting, you don't really need to pre-qualify because you should have already pre-qualified. I will say the questions I just outlined, such as your pain questions and your current environment questions, are still good questions to ask at the meeting. Most likely you won't have the opportunity to ask all of your current environment questions and pain questions at the initial contact, so you can ask those in the meeting, but ideally you should have already the step of pre-qualifying the prospect is complete at the initial contact step. The next step in the qualifying process is just more firm qualifying process, and this is where you're not just wondering, is there maybe a fit, but you're wanting to really get more clarity. Okay, now I know there may be a fit, so I want to know, is it truly a fit, or is it a fit right now? And so the way you do this is you're just going to ask really a little bit more firm questions that drill into what's going on with the prospect, and you're really just trying to determine how much do they genuinely need what you sell and genuinely want what you sell, and how likely are they to purchase from you. And the goal here is not to determine, does it make sense to keep talking? The goal here is to determine if the deal is real, okay? And the reason why you want to determine if the deal is real is because you're trying to protect your valuable time. And if the deal is not real, then you want to be extremely cautious about investing time in that prospect. For example, if that prospect asks you to fly across the country for a meeting, you might not want to do that if the deal isn't real, if the prospect's really not truly qualified. So I'll show you some examples of what that looks like. Now, in order to thoroughly qualify the prospect, you basically want to assess and measure them. And instead of just saying, okay, is this a good prospect or is this a bad prospect, we like to get a little bit more granular, a little bit more systematic, hence the SMART sales system. So we suggest that you measure the prospect in 4 different areas. And so the first area is there a genuine need to purchase? Ability to purchase, authority to purchase, and intent to purchase. So, hey, you might start a conversation with a prospect and they may love what you sell. And because you get rejection from so many prospects just through naturally selling, you're going to face more no's than yeses. And because you face a lot of no's, it might feel so great to hear how much a prospect loves what you sell. Is their love and the love that they have and the interest that they have, is it more of a want or is it more of a need? So let me give you an example. And when I go through these 4 areas, I'm going to use selling a car example because we can all relate to that. If someone walks onto the car lot and you're a car salesperson, and let's say they love the vehicle, right? But the car that they own is 2 years old. Okay, so it's not as bad as it's 6 months old, but it's 2 or 3 years old. It's a very nice car. It's in great shape, and they're just kind of bored with it. It's a sports car, and they want more of an SUV. Now, when you learn how good of a car they drive, you realize that they want to buy a new car, but they don't need to buy a new car. And to give you a different example on the other extreme, let's say that the person that you're talking to, their car is 15 years old and it breaks down maybe 3 or 4 times a year. This person truly needs what you sell. When just looking at the area of does the prospect need or want what you sell, that's kind of the spectrum that you can look at. Now, it's not to say that you can't sell to a prospect that it's where it's more of a want. It's just that it might be more difficult to close that sale. If they love what you sell, in the business to business world, this happens a lot where you might sell a product that the company and the organization and the prospect love what you sell. And because they love what you sell, you're able to get meetings and do demonstrations and have all these discussions going on. It seems like everything's moving along really quickly. But then in the 11th hour, things go really quiet and the prospect stops responding to you. Maybe they never respond to you ever again. What happened in that scenario is that they wanted what you sold, but there wasn't a true need because, let's just say, the current system was not too bad. And so it was getting the job done. While there was room for improvement, everything was okay. And so when it was time to get approval for the money to purchase your product, it got denied and the prospect goes quiet because they're embarrassed that they wasted so much of your time and they just end up going silent on you, going behind the moon. So that's an example of if the prospect needs what you sell. That is an explanation on really looking at and measuring the prospect on how much they genuinely need what you sell. You may say, well, that sounds very logical to do, but I don't really know how to do that. Don't worry, I'm going to give you questions to ask for each of these categories, and starting with the need to purchase. So here are some questions you can ask to feel out, does the prospect genuinely need what you sell? What motivated you to look at us? So if it's an inbound lead, right? If they came in through your website, they walked in through your store, what brought you out? That's a really good question. Going back to the car dealership, if the person says, well, I'm just looking around because my spouse is next door shopping. Well, so they're just killing time. That really tells you right away that they don't need what you sell. But if the answer is, well, I'm here because my lease is expiring at the end of the year. Okay, they need what you sell. Do you mind if I ask why you took time out of your schedule to meet with us? What improvements could you see if you make this purchase? What will happen if you don't purchase something? So it may sound like they love what you sell and they genuinely want it, but what happens if they just say, if they don't purchase it? Is everything okay, or do problems start to happen? Is there a date when this purchase needs to be made? What happens if this purchase isn't made by that date? What time frame are you trying to work along? So just really general questions to kind of feel out the prospect. Now let's move to the next category, which is ability to purchase. So this is basically, does the prospect have the money to purchase what you sell? I mean, going back to the car dealership, if someone comes onto the car dealership, their car is 15 years old and breaks down, they need what you sell. But if the person is unemployed and has a tremendous amount of debt, then they don't have the ability to purchase what you sell. So you could take them on a test drive and they will be, loving what you sell, but they don't have the ability to purchase. And while that might seem a little bit obvious in a car sales scenario, if you don't really assess this area in a B2B world, you could end up wasting time on a prospect that seems very interested by not really identifying if they have the ability to purchase from a funding or budget standpoint. So you want to identify what's going on in this area as soon as possible. Some questions to ask, are, instead of just saying, do you have money to spend, or how much do you have to spend? I like to ask, what is the budgetary range that you need this purchase to stay within? So I just think that asking this question this way, you're asking a range, so it gives the prospect a little bit more room to be more comfortable sharing information versus how much do you want to spend? Is there budget approved for this project? Have the funds been allocated? What budget or what department will this purchase be made under? Are there other purchases that this funding might be competing with? How does this project fit with other initiatives from a priority standpoint? So just some real general, money-related type of questions that can help you to identify what's going on with the prospect in terms of their ability to purchase what what you're talking about selling to them. So I want, before we move on to the next category, I want to point out, if you ask these questions and if you determine that the prospect does not have the ability to purchase, that doesn't necessarily mean run for the hills and cut bait and never and stop talking to this prospect. These areas, not only does figuring out how strong or weak the prospect is in these areas determine how qualified the prospect is and how much time you should invest, but determining which area the prospect is weak will give you clues for what you need to do next. Okay? And to explain, to show you what I'm talking about there, if I go back to this ability to purchase. So let's say you ask some of these questions and you realize the prospect does not have the ability to purchase in terms of having the money. There could be a variety of scenarios, but let's just look at two main ones. So one is they do not have budget right now because this year's budget is all used and they don't have budget available right now. They technically today do not have the ability to purchase what you sell. Now that doesn't mean, okay, I need to get out of here and not waste any time. But that does tell you, okay, maybe I need to be a little bit cautious and not just be flying all over the place. What you need to do is create a long-term strategy where you're staying in contact and you're continuing to invest a little bit of amount of time so that when the prospect's budget opens up or when they begin their budget planning process, you can be there and be in contact and be fresh in their mind. What I'm getting at here is the budget constraint or lack of budget a short-term or a long-term issue? If they love your product but they don't have budget and it's a question of whether they will ever have budget, then you should be extremely guarded with your time and just invest the bare minimum amount of time or walk away, in an appropriate manner. Moving on to the next category. So authority to purchase. This is basically, does the prospect you're dealing with have the decision-making power, right? So if we go back to the car dealership, you may be talking to a prospect. They have a 15-year-old car. They need your car. They have a good job. Hey, sounds great. They have a great credit rating. Okay, great. But you know what? It's their spouse that is the one who decides on big ticket items, and their spouse is not the one that is not with them at that particular time. In this scenario, you would think it's a completely qualified prospect based on having money and needing a car, but the fact that they're not the decision maker, it's not a completely qualified prospect. So in that scenario, you might want to be a little guarded with your time, and you need to get the decision maker involved. Let me convert that to a business-to-business example, right? So you might be dealing with a department manager, and that manager has employees working for them. They have certain decision-making authority, right? And if you were to ask that person, "Are you the decision maker?" they may even tell you yes, because they do make some decisions. But for the purchase of your product, it would actually be their boss that approves the funding and signs the contract. In this case, they do not have the authority to purchase. So you could be spending all sorts of time and meetings and manpower with this person, and you think it's qualified because they're a department manager. But when it comes time to get the deal approved, it goes to their manager, who's the real decision maker, who had no idea what discussions you were having, and the deal falls apart. It fell apart because it wasn't a truly qualified opportunity. So here are some questions that you could ask to determine. Now, as you can tell from the example I just gave you, I don't really like asking, "Are you the decision maker?" Because I think you can get some faulty answers to that question for a couple reasons. One is the prospect may think that they are the decision maker when they're really not, meaning that was the scenario I gave you where they do have some power, but not the power that's needed for your purchase. They might also tell you that they're the decision maker because they don't want to they want to make a good impression with you, and they don't want to look weak in any way. So you say, "Are you the decision maker?" "Yeah, I'm the decision maker." They also might think that if you ask if they're the decision maker, that you're trying to get around them. So, and they don't want you to get around them because then they might get in trouble or look bad. So they want to keep you right where you are. So they'll tell you, no, I'm the decision maker. I'm the one you need to be dealing with, when they're truly not. What I like to ask instead is, what is the decision making process? So they may say, well, I'm the decision maker. Okay, and then you say, okay, so when I get you the paperwork, you're the one that signs it? No. Then, okay, well, what happens after that? Well, then it needs to go to this person. Okay, what happens after that? You could take that through, just take it through each step and just keep asking them what next, all the way to the contract getting signed, approved, money spent. Mapping out that process will let you know who the decision maker is. What parties will be involved in making the decision? What are the key factors in the decision? What functional areas will be impacted? Is there a committee this needs to go through? Who's the ultimate decision maker? Who's the person that will need to sign the agreement? So some good questions to ask there, just regarding trying to identify how much authority does the person have that you're trying to deal with. So before we move on, let's look at this and think, okay, well, if the person doesn't have the authority to purchase, what do we do, right? If you identify that they're not the decision maker, what I would do is I would try to turn them into a coach. You want to try to get the person with the decision-making authority involved, or at least aware of the conversation. So and by the way, the worst thing you could do is say, oh, let's say you find out that the CFO is the decision maker, can you get me a meeting with them, right? The worst thing you could do is ask, can you get me a meeting with them? Because the person that you're dealing with, your prospect, will feel insulted. They'll feel disrespected. Like you respected them up until that point. Now you're trying to get around them. So that could damage rapport. They could try to block you. They might feel insecure about their place in the organization and not want some product pushing salesperson to get around them and start bothering the CFO. So what I would do is, when you identify who the decision maker is, one tactic is just to be very matter of fact and say, oh, okay, great. Part of our standard proposal creation process is that we have a brief 10-minute meeting with the CFO. So that's just our standard process. What's the best way to get that on the calendar? That's just one way that I've used in the past. Just be very direct, matter of fact, not, can you get me a meeting with them? This is our process and whatnot. So if you identify that the prospect doesn't have the authority to purchase, you might want to become a bit more, and if they're not willing to get the person with authority to become involved or be aware, then you might want to become more guarded with how much time you spend with them and treat it as not a completely qualified lead or opportunity. The optimum scenario is that not necessarily that you start dealing only with the decision maker and get around the prospect you're dealing with, but an ideal scenario is that the person who makes the decision becomes more aware, or you identify that they are aware of what you're talking about, the discussions you're having, and you get them to have provide some sort of executive sponsorship for your project or opportunity that you're working on. Moving on to the last area, which is what we call the intent to purchase. So does the prospect have the genuine intent to purchase what you're selling? So let's go back to the car dealership example. So let's say that the person that walks onto the dealership, you're talking to them, they have a 15-year-old car, they have a great job, and they are the decision maker. So you might say, check, 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 this is a good prospect. I can pass up talking to all the other prospects on the dealership because I'm going to sell a new car today to this person, right? So you don't have to worry about your opportunity cost, right? Now, one thing you might miss in that scenario is that if you don't ask the right questions, you might miss the fact that this prospect spent all afternoon, 4 hours to be exact, at another dealership that sells the same car that you sell. They've already test drove, they've already negotiated a price, they've already built some rapport with the salesperson, and all they're doing is they're coming to your dealership to validate that they negotiated a good price. And when they just walk on and talk price a little bit with you and you give them a price that hasn't been negotiated, and maybe you end up spending an hour with them, they end up leaving and going and buying the product somewhere else. And so what happened there is that they were qualified except for the fourth area, which is a genuine intent to purchase from you. They had the genuine intent to make a purchase, but not the genuine intent to purchase from you. And without asking the right question, you would never know that, and you wouldn't know what went on, and you just wasted an hour as a salesperson. Converting that to the B2B world is that a prospect may be talking to a vendor for 3 months. They might even produce an RFP because they needed an RFP either to get a better price negotiated, or the RFP is part of their procurement process, but they had to produce an RFP. And the RFP got sent to you. And you look at the RFP, and obviously because of the RFP, they need what you sell, they have the ability to purchase, and they have the authority to purchase. But what you don't know is that the vendor they've been working with for 3 months actually wrote the RFP for them. And the vendor designed the RFP so that it fit exactly with their product and not yours. And so if you get that RFP and you aren't aware that what's going on here is that the prospect has the intent to purchase from the vendor that they've already been working with. And they're just going through the motions. And if you aren't aware of that, what happens? Well, you could spend a week putting together a beautiful presentation that you send over and you never hear anything back. And what happens there is you wasted a week of opportunity cost lost. All those other meetings you could have held. Even if you don't have other prospects to sell to, you could have been cold calling and networking for a week, generating leads. And those leads that you would have generated, some of them would have led to sales. And the sales that you missed out on is your opportunity cost for working on a prospect that did not have a genuine intent to purchase from you. This one can be easy to miss, but here are questions that you can ask, and these are very reasonable. What other options are you considering? So when that person is on the dealership, what other cars have you looked at? Have you looked at any other cars? Have you gone to any other dealerships? Now, they may lie to you, but at least if you ask the question and they lie, at least you've done what you're supposed to do. You would think that asking a prospect, what other options are you considering, you would maybe think, well, I shouldn't ask that because it's their personal business, or I don't want to give them the ideas to look at other options. So you may be scared. I would tell you, don't be scared, be confident in your own product, and ask this in a very direct way, and you'd be surprised how often they just tell you exactly who else they're considering. How far along are you in discussions with them? That's a good question, because if they're very far along and they're not just now talking to you, then it's not good. Not only are they very far along in the process and you're an afterthought, but they most likely have rapport already with your competition. How do you feel about their options? What do you like about them? What do you not like about them? How do they compare to what we have to offer? These are all great questions. If they say we're looking at your direct competitor, you may know from your playbook and your battle card how you compete, how you compare, and how you differentiate. But ask the prospect how you compare. Get their idea, because they've been talking to the other competition. You don't know what their mind's been filled up with. So you may either want to validate that they know how you're better, or you want to identify if you need to begin to educate them on how you compare. Or maybe based on what they share with you, you know that you have no chance of winning the business and you know not to waste any more of your valuable time. Is there a reason why you would choose us over them? If you had to make a decision today, which day would you lean? So just some very general questions that allow you to assess how the prospect's genuine intent to purchase from you. Those are the 4 areas to assess and measure the prospect. How much do they need what you sell? How able are they to buy what you sell from a money and funding standpoint? How much authority do they have in terms of decision-making power, to being able to decide to move forward? And what are their intentions? Do they intend to purchase, not necessarily purchase at all, but purchase from you instead of the competition? Once you add, and you can measure and assess how they are in those 4 areas by asking good questions. Where you want to ask these questions, you don't want to ask those questions in the initial contact for two reasons, really. One is the initial contact's really short and brief, so you don't want to spend valuable time asking all these different questions. You also don't have rapport with the prospect yet, or not a lot, at the initial contact. So it's not a good time for you to really ask, about the decision-making process, really deep questions about their intentions or whatnot. Although at the initial contact, you could, ask them what brought them out or what other options they're considering. But my point is that if the qualifying questions are a bit firm, no need to really push them on the prospect when you haven't built rapport, which might be the case at the initial contact. So where you want to ask these questions is at the meeting step, which is where you'll have more time. This is where you're sitting at the table, you're 30 to 60 minutes meeting with the prospect. An ideal way to go is spend the first half of the meeting talking about them, learning about them, and then so your current environment questions are really good for that. And then towards the end of that, learning about them is when you could start to ask your hard, more firm qualifying questions. Or you could learn about them with like pain questions and your current environment questions. Then you could talk a little bit about how you can help them and a little bit about your product and company. And then you could wrap up your meeting with asking some of your qualifying questions. Is just one way to incorporate those into your meeting. You could also ask your qualifying questions in your presentation as well. In theory, the meeting is really your main opportunity to qualify the prospect. In fact, not only is it a good opportunity to qualify the prospect, but most likely your presentation is going to be an expenditure of time. Could be travel, but it could very well be that the presentation is a virtual meeting. But even so, it's another 1 to 2 hours of your time in the meeting when you're giving your presentation. But you also might spend a lot of time preparing for the presentation. So before you put all that time at risk, you want to qualify the prospect to determine, is the deal for real or not? Although you might not have, I just went through a bunch of different qualifying questions, so it could very easily be the case that you don't ask all of your qualifying questions in the meeting, which means you qualify them enough to roll over to the presentation, and at the end of the presentation, that's a great opportunity for you to go back to your qualifying questions to continue to learn more about the prospect. That's pretty much it. A few key takeaways here. So the key thing with qualifying is the goal is to protect your time, right? Your most valuable asset, and to protect it by separating good prospects from bad, and then increasing the amount of time you spend with good prospects and decreasing the amount of time you spend with the bad. Key way to qualify is just simply asking good questions, and you use questions to measure and assess the prospects. Ask pre-qualifying questions just to determine if it makes sense to even talk. Once you're talking, use qualifying questions to determine, is the lead for real and is it worth your time. Pre-qualify at the initial contact or first time speaking with the prospect. Qualify every conversation or meeting.